Welcome everyone to this session about supporting food system transformation with better access to essential data. We know food systems are complex and big, and they're difficult to navigate, and they're even more difficult to navigate if you don't have the right data to navigate them with. And so this session today is really talking about two initiatives that are linked but complementary. One is called the Food System Dashboard, and one is the Food System Countdown Initiative. We call them the Dashboard and the Countdown for short. What you've got are some of the people responsible for putting these together, the dashboard and the countdown, and you're going to hear from them today. You're going to hear from Jess Fanzo and Rosalind Riemans on the dashboard, and you're going to hear from a panel, Nema Kolokovic, Jose Moncayo, and Mario Herrera on the countdown. They're going to be on the panel. But first, let me share with you a couple of slides just to tell you, just to give you a sense of how different these two initiatives are and to contrast them. So I hope you can see this slide, colleagues. Yes, can everyone see? Yes. Good. So the dashboard and the countdown, the purpose of the dashboard started in 2020 and the countdown started in 2021, 22. And the purpose of the dashboard, well, I should say the dashboard was launched in 2020. The purpose of the dashboard is to really to pull together all food system data to stimulate appropriate action. Before the dashboard existed, you had to go to 30 or 40 different places. So we set the dashboard up, structured all the 200 indicators around food system, the food system conceptual framework. And it's about describing food systems, diagnosing the food systems by developing benchmarks for the indicators, and then linking that diagnosis to a set of actions in the decide function. And any of you familiar with the dashboard will be familiar with the describe, diagnose, and decide. The data is over 200 indicators selected by the smaller dashboard team. And it's inclusive. It's obviously subject to relevance, availability for many countries, and quality checks. The countdown is more focused on a parsimonious set of curated indicators, which with a more of an independent accountability narrative. And that really reflects the fact that it came out of the UN Food System Summit of 2021. A group of us were dismayed that there wasn't a formal mechanism for monitoring food system performance. And so we decided to set up the countdown to at least address part of that gap. And so it has 40 to 50 indicators selected by an independent group of more than 60 researchers using, I would say, a more rigorous and inclusive indicator process than the one the dashboard has to get to that small essential set. There are some indicators in the countdown report that are not in the dashboard, but as we evolve the dashboard, those countdown indicators will eventually be transferred or included in the dashboard. The end users of both initiatives are roughly the same. I would say there's going to be a wider range of end users for the dashboard than for the countdown. The dashboard had its origins in the Global Nutrition Report of 2015 and the high-level panel in 2017, and the countdown from the UN Food System Summit. And the fact that the outcomes are in the countdown are really structured around the 5 action tracks from the UN Food System Summit. So you can see them there. The livelihoods, resilience, and governance are featured very strongly in Countdown and not yet in the dashboard. In terms of the research goals, the dashboard's kind of a platform to support researchers all over the world in whatever they want to do research on. The Countdown team will develop its own research agenda based on these 40 to 50 indicators. They will publish an annual countdown paper, which is supposed to be sort of a state of food systems globally, and that will be published in a top journal, hopefully, with accompanying policy briefs. There will be no publications from the dashboard as per se, unless there may be some occasional issue-specific reports. And just to give you a very quick sense of the evolution, in terms of the indicators, you can see that the countdown indicators, there are some in countdown that are not in dashboard. I think eventually over time, the yellow countdown indicators will all be subsumed in the dashboard indicators. But the people involved with the dashboard and the countdown, there's a smaller group of people involved in the dashboard. They come from GAIN and Hopkins and FAO and Bioversity, the Alliance. The countdown is this group of 50 to 60 people, which we think will probably grow over time. So these two groups there'll be some overlap, but they will remain separate for the large part. So that's just a very quick overview of the countdown on the dashboard. Now I'm going to pass over to Jess Fanzo. Jess is a professor at Hopkins, and she's one of the founders of the dashboard and the countdown. And Jess, over to you, speaking about the dashboard.
Great. Thank you so much, Lawrence. And thanks everyone for joining today, which is an early Monday morning for many of us. I know it's a busy time of the week and of the year. I'm going to walk you through the new design of the food systems dashboard, and I'll spend about 10 minutes doing that to show you some of the redesign we've done, the new features and new analytics that I hope you are able to use and incorporate into your work. So many of you have probably been, I hope, have been to the food systems dashboard. It's foodsystemsdashboard.org. And this is our new page. And I'm going to walk you through some highlights and not show you everything, but I think a good place to start is right here. You can toggle on this button called More About Food Systems, and you'll see this framework. And this framework is a new design, but it really shows the different components and outcomes of food systems. And we've really mapped indicators across this framework as best we could. And so let's dig a bit into what the dashboard is looking like now. So there's different ways to look at data. One is through this global data, which allows you to look at the whole expanse of indicators that we have. Now, what is up here is the percentage of the population who cannot afford a healthy diet, which FAO now tracks every year. But when you look over here on the left at these indicators, we have many, over 250 indicators across drivers of food systems, across food supply chains, food environments, individual factors, a few on consumer behavior, 4 new ones on cooking practices collected by Cookpad, as well as a whole range of outcomes with a lot of new environmental impacts of food systems, new diet data, including the Diet Quality Project data that was just released late last week. And you can filter all the data through a food system typology from rural, traditional to industrialized. Like here, you can see me filtering, or you can filter by income classification. Here's lower middle income, for example. You can look at the metadata. What exactly is this indicator? You can download all the data down here at the bottom. You can also look at the data in different ways. You can look across time. Here's a little play button to look how data changes over time. And we have some data that is much longer as far as how long it's been collected. You can also look at the data by graphs. Again, looking at different time frames. You can, again, filter by food system type or income classification. You can filter by certain countries. Let's say you want to look at Kenya and you want to compare it to East Africa and you want to compare it to the world. You can do that. So this allows for you to look at a whole range of ways of any of the data. And here's, of course, a table if you want to download a table. Another way to look at data is the compare tool that's sitting right up here. And this allows for you to compare 2 indicators and look at their associations. So here, let's do supply of meat. Let's do supply of meat, and let's do anemia and look at the associations. And this is showing you the association of anemia with supply of meat. Here you can see the United States. We supply a lot of meat in the world, and it correlates with lower anemia, whereas you have places with low supply of meat that correlates with a high anemia rate. So it allows for you to just explore patterns and associations when you put different indicators together. Now, the third really nice feature we have now are the country profiles. So this is to look at specific countries, and it gives you a macro view of how their food systems are performing. The data is categorized by regions and then subregions. So let's look at Ghana as an example. And what this shows is a shorter list of indicators, so not the 250, but about 45 indicators that you can look to see how Ghana's doing with regard to the characteristics of their food systems and how food systems are performing. Now, you can compare Ghana to where it sits in its subregion, Western Africa, and the world, or you can untoggle that and not show that. But let's just, for sake of comparison, show that. And here's total greenhouse gas emissions. You can see Ghana here in blue compared to West Africa, compared to the world. So Ghana's actually not doing so bad. And you can print this country profile. But one of the new features we have is this diagnose and decide scorecard here on the left. What we've done is we've looked at 39 indicators and created thresholds as being unlikely challenge areas, shown in green, to yellow, potential challenge areas, and red is likely challenge area. So you can get a quick snapshot of how Ghana's food system is performing. So let me just give you an example here. Here's supply of vegetables. Now you can see here's Ghana, here's Western Africa, and here's the world. Ghana is below a likely challenge area in their supply of vegetables. And you can see the scorecard thresholds. If you don't want to see that, you can just unclick that. But what it also shows is what you can do about it. Working with Corinna Hawks and colleagues, the dashboard team identified these actions to improve in this case, the supply of vegetables and improve diets. And so we've come up with actions and the impacts of those actions as potential policy areas that countries could invest in. If you want to learn more about these actions, you can find the methodology right here in our resources section of how the actions were identified. And Corinna Hawks, along with Rosalind, who will be speaking next, have developed a whole new set of actions on improving the environment and mitigating and adapting to climate change. So those will be coming online in the dashboard, hopefully in the next few months as well. So lots of resources on the dashboard about food systems, who created the dashboard, why do we think it's needed, a lot of different resources of past webinars. The one last thing I wanted to show you is you can also link to the Countdown Initiative right down here. This will be talked about in the panel session. It's a nice complement to the food systems dashboard work. And I just want to end with some work that GAIN is leading, which is very exciting, of creating subnational dashboards. Many of you who've been following the dashboard and the collaboration and going to it are yearning for subnational dashboards, and GAIN is doing that in 6 countries. Let me just show you a quick snapshot. Here is the Indonesia food system subnational dashboard. And this is quite incredible, but working in countries in partnership with the governments and other stakeholders, we're developing these subnational dashboards, littering the subnational dashboards with subnational data that's available. This here is showing you supermarkets per 100,000 inhabitants. Here you can see Bali. has the highest concentration. And we can even go further and drill down and disaggregate even more so at the administration 2 level in Indonesia. And the other example here is Nigeria. This is showing you the share of employment in agriculture of women, showing you subnationally where this is happening. So just some exciting subnational dashboard development that we will be sharing with the world, and really looking forward to engaging with all of you further on that. So those are just some highlights of the new design. I think it's very pretty. We had our first designers, iTech, do our first dashboard, which was fantastic. And now we've been working with Friends of the Web based here in Baltimore, near Johns Hopkins, and it's been a fantastic endeavor, and looking forward to further improving it and getting your feedback. Thank you. So let me turn it over now to Rosalind Remans. Ro, as she's known to us, has been a long friend and collaborator of mine, but also on the dashboard and the countdown. She's a visiting researcher at the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. She's also has a position at Ghent University, but most recently and what I find most exciting, she's the co-founder of the GLOCO Learning. It's a social cooperative providing co-learning sessions for food systems change. And it's a really exciting new organization, but she's promised to continue working with us on the food systems dashboard and countdown, and I will turn it over to her.
Great, thanks so much, Jess, and really happy to be here also. Yeah, and we've, based upon different discussions with the dashboard team, we've explored different ways of how we can make the dashboard also further powerful to contribute to problem-solve environmental challenges. And as a start, we've included in the dashboard these 5 environmental dimensions that are really impacted by the food systems, and on their turn also impact the functioning of the food system themselves. So this is climate, including greenhouse gas emissions, land use and soil health, biodiversity, water use, and pollution. And we've identified an initial set of indicators for which we had data across a large amount of countries and rigorous scientific evidence on the use and establishment of those indicators in the dashboard for each of these domains. And we've and the food system really sits at the nexus of many of these indicators, meaning that if you act upon food, you often act on different of these indicators simultaneously. For example, change in agriculture, land kind of influences on one hand climate, as well as biodiversity loss, so greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss, through acting on one of these indicators through the food system. And now, and with the inclusion of these indicators in the dashboard, we really hope to facilitate also the inclusion of these indicators in food system dialogues and actions and policies, as well as the other way around, to really include the food system much more upfront in the climate and environmental agendas, like is now also happening in the COP next week, where food and food systems are much more upfront in the climate negotiations. So if we further look into explore further the dashboard for some of the environmental indicators, for example, for climate, for example, you can look here at in outcomes on the environmental impacts. You can use, for example, greenhouse gas emissions from total greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture as an example, and it kind of stands out that China, India, Brazil, and the US kind of stand out with large amount of total greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. And then you can explore also further some underlying related indicators on that, for example, agricultural land change over the last 10 years. And we are still working on the scale to further help visualize some of the difference. But here you see, for example, Brazil standing out in that one. You can also look at, for example, nutrient nitrogen, where China kind of really stands out, nutrient nitrogen per unit of land. And we are working with the FAO and others to further include further breakdown of these different indicators, and also with new data sets at subnational level as also the subnational indicators come out. You can also look more at kind of consumer level indicators, where we have per capita estimates, and these are estimates of per capita greenhouse gas emissions of food consumption. And then you can look at certain supply chains like Jess, or kind of what links further at the consumption level. And for example, you see then, like Jess showed earlier, the kind of the meat supply, but also others, and further kind of explore different connections that are potentially linked to environmental outcomes. Now, we also want to emphasize that, for example, also climate is, of course, it's not only an outcome, it's also a major driver and a risk also on food systems. So you can find here also different environment and climate change indicators under the drivers. For example, we used the Global Climate Risk Index that summarizes a lot of different climate indicators. And as we are working more on subnational food systems, we are including different indicators at that level. Now, climate really interacts with many other environmental indicators, and including a set across these 5 domains, we really want to facilitate a discussion and exploration also of how food systems interact across these domains. And to further facilitate this, you can also use the country profiles, and later on the subnational country profiles. If we look, for example, at Cameroon, and here you can explore different indicators where you can seek some red flags and where you can find additional potential entry points for action on the environment that can have an influence on different indicators of the food system. For example, here on outcomes for Cameroon, you see agricultural land change during the last 10 years as a red flag, as well as the average proportion of natural vegetation embedded in agricultural land. And so here you can also explore different options to act upon those, and through which you can, for example, by increasing the proportion of natural vegetation agricultural landscapes, you can influence on one hand carbon storage in your landscape. On the other hand, also regulation of water flows can help with having more pieces of natural vegetation in your landscape. So you can act upon different environmental indicators by some of these highlighted in the dashboard, and explore together pathways that connects them. Now, to further on these actions, so like Jess already mentioned, we've been working with the City University of London, with Corina Hawkes and her team, to identify different actions that can be there as candidates, as options to act upon, and that have different pathways underneath. And these pathways also explain some of the synergies and trade-offs between different environmental indicators, as well as different environmental and other nutrition, food security, livelihoods indicators. And so these will be added also soon to the dashboard. And we hope you will enjoy exploring further these new indicators added. They are, of course, not perfect yet, and we continue to evolve them also in close collaboration with the Food System Countdown Initiative. And we welcome also all input and suggestions as the dashboards continue to evolve and improve the data underneath and the interactions between those data. Yeah, thank you very much. I will give the word back to Lawrence for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Ro. Really nice and succinct and nice on time. And we've got our first question in the Q&A box. Colleagues online, please do ask us questions. We may not be able to answer them all, but we will try very hard. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our three panelists. We have Namakolo Kovic, who is the CGIAR Regional Director for East and Southern Africa. It's a huge job. Congratulations, Namakolo. She's also ILRI's Director General's representative to Ethiopia and the CGIAR Ethiopia country convener. We have Mario Herrero, who's a professor of sustainable food systems and global change at Cornell. His title's way too long, so that's all I'm going to say for you, Mario, but he's known to many of you as one of the leading researchers in this space. And Jose Moncayo, and Jose is the director of the Economic and Social Statistics Division at FAO. So we're really thrilled to have these three very distinguished people with us. Namakolo, let me kick off with you, and then I'll go to Jose and then Mario. So Namakolo, how, you have a real, you're able to sort of look at the national and subnational level as well as the global level, one of the few people who can straddle and connect those three different levels. Tell us how, from your experience, you think governments can use the dashboard and the countdown as they begin to develop and implement their national food system pathways. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lawrence. I think I want to build on what Jess showed us for Nigeria. And I think we need to keep in mind that when countries were developing their food systems transformation pathways, they were actually intended to be informed by a vision. So there is a common vision that different food systems actors are supposed to rally behind to try and bring about positive change. So the dashboard can then, especially if you take it subnational, it will really help to the government figure out where they are at in their food systems at national level. But if you get into a subnational dashboard, then you get to a point where they can actually make decisions in specific agroecologies to do better on certain indicators according to how the trajectory of those indicators evolve over time. But I think it is complementary to the countdown as well, because the countdown will then give almost like an accountability narrative to a smaller group of indicators that are curated specifically to show us if a country is making progress on the types of visions that they have set for themselves. So I really do think both would be very useful to governments, but I think whether we get there or not depends on what we do now to link into those government processes. Thank you.
Thanks, Namakolo. And presumably the countdown can be implemented at a subnational level as well. That we're not there yet, but that surely should be one of our goals.
I think it should be one of our goals, because a lot of the implementation decisions for programs are actually happening at the subnational level.
And Namakolo, we're hoping to get this done for Ethiopia and India as well. We have to raise the funds to do that. And if we can do that, we'll cover 2.5 billion people in the world with these 8 dashboards. But what do we need to do to make them really useful? I mean, how do we sustain them beyond the project? I mean, GAIN and the dashboard team are not going to sustain 6 or 8 subnational dashboards. How do we make that an enduring, owned process?
I think they need to be embedded into national processes. Just giving an example of Ethiopia, the discussions in Ethiopia are to have the dashboard linked to the Ethiopia Food System Transformation Pathways monitoring process. And so it's embedded within an institutional environment with the Ethiopian Public Health Institute at the helm, working with the Ethiopian Institute of Agriculture Research. So if it is embedded within a country process, then when the project is finished, there can be some continuity. The other thing is what they've done is they've linked it to a Secota Declaration, which is the government platform through which they're implementing different programs, including the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement and other agriculture interventions. And so that embedding within an existing government program that the government is actually investing in offers opportunities for sustainability. And I think that's what we should be thinking of.
Thanks, Namakola. And we are in, I've been to Indonesia and Bangladesh in the last 4 or 5 months, and I've seen both. I've seen the efforts to develop the subnational dashboards in both of those countries. And in Indonesia, Bappenas, which is the National Planning Commission, is very committed. In fact, they're nagging us to move a bit faster than we have been because they want to begin using it. And it's the same in Bangladesh. It's the Food Policy Monitoring Unit that is really driving this. So we have to do that, and we are doing it. And we are also spending quite a bit of time at the front end understanding user needs, government policymakers primarily, and then doing some, I think we'll be doing some training once the platforms are up and running, because there just makes it look easy, but it's not that easy sometimes to use these platforms. Let me quickly move on to Jose. Jose, so we heard from Namakola about sort of country and subnational uses of the Countdown report. Tell me what you think a more general value add of the Countdown initiative is. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Lawrence, and hello, good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Okay, let's start saying that policymakers need data and indicators to be able to guide their action. But let's agree that it's not any data. This data needs to be available for them. They need to be accessible. They need to be reliable, curated, of high quality, timely, and very importantly, actionable. But to have this type of data and indicators is not straightforward. On one hand, there are important gaps that impair a policymaker ability to make good and informed decisions. And in the other hand, there are sometimes lack of access to the data that is actually being produced. It's not public. For example, data in the hands of the private sector. Finally, among the data that is available, there is a lot of rubbish. Okay, a lot of rubbish of data and indicators. And that basically produces noise and disinformation. And policymakers need to be guided on what is the best that they can use. So having this in mind, the Food System Countdown initiative go directly into supporting policymakers, and it presents a comprehensive framework of metrics covering different dimensions that are relevant for food systems, following a rigorous mechanism to select accessible, reliable, relevant, and actionable indicators and data sources, and does an effort to present them in a way that they are ready to be used, okay, and to systematically track the evolution and progress of food systems. So the indicator framework of this initiative, more in general, allow policymakers to monitor food systems. But monitoring is not the only use that policymaker can do with what we intend to do. We expect that they will also be able to use it to set priorities, meaning to use them to target actions and interventions across food systems, which is very important. It's very important to direct investments efficiently. We also expect that policymakers will be able to use the indicator framework in the initiative for benchmarking, meaning enabling their capacities to do comparative analysis of the indicators against some targets that are very important. I mean, all of this, that kind of exercise is very important for accountability purposes, but targets that, of course, also need to be put. Finally, the initiative will also emphasize the gaps, okay? Because whenever you are building an indicator framework, you make use of whatever is there for you at your disposal, but you also notice the data gaps that exist. So one of the outcomes that we expect from the initiative, the Countdown initiative, is to emphasize the gaps that we have with the objectives for policymakers and the community at large to advancing a data agenda that will, that will have the objective to inform us which are the gaps that need to be filled in the years to come. Over to you, Lorenz.
Thanks, Jose. Not all gaps need to be filled, but some of them really are impediments to action. Which gaps do you think are which ones trouble you the most, Jose?
The ones that trouble me the most are what I call the fundamental ones. Okay, there is still very little that we know about what is the economic contribution of food systems, for example. We know which is the contribution of the agricultural sector to the economy, right? But which is the contribution of the food systems requires the combination of a lot of data, other type of data, and also to develop some kind of methodology in order to be able to know how to integrate this type of data. But it's a fundamental question. There is another one, for example, how many people are basically involved in food systems? We also know very little. We know something about how many people are in the agricultural sector. We know how many people works, for example, in the retail sector, but in the overall food systems, okay, we know nothing, almost nothing. And apart from that, it's not a straightforward exercise of summation of different components, okay? So when the methodologies as well need to be developed. And let me give you a final example: food losses and waste and food waste, okay? Which is very important, okay, for the process of transformation of food systems. We also know very little. In FAO, we have made a lot of efforts to try to say something at the global level of how many food is being lost. And but the information that we have for that type of exercise is very scarce in a way that we are able to try to estimate something at the global and regional levels, but definitely we don't have the amount of data that is needed in order to trust our own estimates at the country level, okay? So those are, for examples of three fundamental gaps that exist that they need to be filled in the short run.
Thanks, Jose. Really interesting. And my own favorite is we don't really know what governments are spending on food systems either. We know what they're kind of spending on agriculture, I think, but we don't know much about their food system expenditure and their budgets. What does that look like? So these are great, and hopefully the assembling of this data, both in the dashboard and in the countdown, will stimulate the generation and the construction of some of these other indicators that we so desperately need. Hopefully, it will facilitate that a bit. At least it will prompt our knowledge and appreciation of the gap that exists. Thank you, Jose. Mario. Mario, you're a very well published researcher. You're leading a big research team at Cornell. Why are you interested in the countdown? Why are you participating in the countdown, and what do you find novel? Over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, Lawrence. Hello to everyone. It's great that you are here with us. And well, your question is central to the way we actually need to operate. For me, the countdown, especially, and the dashboard, the fundamental difference they have with all the other initiatives is the food systems approach. First of all, you see so many initiatives still focused on agriculture, but this is the only initiative that is really setting out itself intentionally to cover all aspects of the food system, all the way from production to consumption. And this is reflected in the range of indicators that we are collecting. It's very comprehensive, and it is a curated set and a way of bringing information from all the partners around. It's not only gathering information, for example, from FAOSTAT, but it is really going around and engaging with data producers globally, data producers of very, very different sorts and coming from very different angles. And that is actually really important for getting the comprehensiveness that we are trying to achieve. The rigor of the countdown is one of the things that distinguishes it very much from other initiatives. These indicators are not there by chance or just because one of us really liked one versus the other one or anything like that. No, this has been a process, and it's been a process that started probably a couple of years ago. And we started with a really big list of indicators, and we managed to end up with the ones that we have, with the 50 or so that we have, by vetting very carefully what do they mean, how are they collected, what are the data sources, their accuracy, whether they are actionable or not, and who can produce them on a continuous basis. At the same time, we did large consultations with ranges of stakeholders just to ensure that we were choosing indicators that really represented the realities and the aspects that needed to be monitored by policymakers and stakeholders in the food systems. This led to something that is really very well curated. And also it led to a fundamental aspect that is key in all these data projects, which is the establishment of very solid partnerships. Partnerships not only between scientists, but partnerships between users of information, partnerships between, with civil society, partnerships between different sectors and different domains, which are essential because many of the actions that we will have to implement in the food system will cut across sectors, and this is fundamental in terms of how we monitor then the food system. The fact that we're also focusing on accountability is also something very, very different to all the other initiatives. It's very easy to put out a data set out there for what I call general consumption. It can be scientists trying to find and you solve a new question, or people wanting a lot of this information, say for context, or for really describing the processes. But the fact that we are really moving towards an actionable agenda makes it really, really different. And we're basically providing some basic indicators that could be reasonably monitored and could be reasonably put together to really look at the state of food systems and look at who's doing what and why and whether we are achieving progress in some of these metrics. This allows for all sorts of additional analysis and additional implementation of actions. The fact that countries will be able to really look at their progress over time, that will be able to benchmark themselves against others and so on, provides a really important way of assessing progress towards us achieving, well, the greater goal of sustainable food systems, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thanks, Mario. If I was in the audience, the question I would ask is, well, we've done benchmarking for some of the dashboard indicators, but for some of the countdown indicators, we haven't yet, and that's because we haven't finally selected them. I think we're just about selected them. The paper is coming out hopefully in the next few months. The first sort of, here's the set, here's the descriptives, here are some associations between these. That's coming out in the next few months, hopefully. But will the countdown use a similar benchmarking process as the dashboard did, or not? Is it too early to say? Over to you.
Well, it's probably too early to say, but what I can tell you is that we are in the process of really examining all this data with a lot of rigor. For example, one of the key things we want to do is to really look at how these indicators are interrelated. And we want to make it easy for people to really be able to monitor and follow the progress of many of these indicators. And if they are all, or many of them are closely interrelated, this might actually perhaps reduce the need for consistently monitor, because we will get a lot of proxies in all of these. We also want to understand how they behave for different groups of countries, which becomes really, really critical. There might be some countries that have had lots of successes in the environmental front, but perhaps not in the nutrition front, and so on. And as we progress with all these analysis, and we have the certainty that they are behaving and that they represent what we want them to represent, they will be included in the countdown, in the dashboard, as we progress. So we foresee a whole series of additional analysis from these indicators.
Thanks, Mario. For small countries like Ireland, I was in Ireland a week before last, and I was presenting the Ireland benchmarked indicators from the dashboard for the Irish food system to, amongst others, the Prime Minister of Ireland, the Taoiseach, and it was the diagnosis function generated sort of 6 or 7 top priorities for the Irish food system. And I showed them on a slide. And I was kind of amazed that these were the 6 or 7 indicators, 6 or 7 issues that people in that audience of 300 people who are all Irish, they all knew Ireland's food system, they were the issues that really resonated with them. So it was really good to get that kind of validation. And we need to do that more and more with more and more countries to get a sense check of whether the data and the benchmarks really are generating things that people in the countries recognize themselves. Thank you, panelists. We've got about 12 minutes left for questions, colleagues on the floor. So please, I don't know, Katya, can people speak? Can we hear them if they speak? Are they allowed to do that? Or do they have to put questions in the Q&A box?
They can unmute themselves. Yeah. If not, I can just unmute people.
Yeah. So please indicate if you'd like to speak up and ask a question, or please ask a question in the Q&A box. Jose, we've got a question from Gina Kennedy in the Q&A box. Do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, sure. That is very much related to what Mario already introduced. That is about how we are going to set the targets. How we are. I mean, if there is an objective of this exercise that is to do benchmarking, that means that we need to set targets for the indicators that are inside of the indicator framework in order to be able to measure performance. And it's not an easy thing. Okay, so depending on the indicator, you will have to make decisions in a very complicated kind of context, because a target that potentially works for one specific geography potentially doesn't make sense to another type of context or another type of geography. There will be indicators in which we can basically find some kind of technical recommendations. Okay, so in which basically we know that above or below certain quantities, for example, things, for example, are not sustainable. That can work for some of the environmental indicators, for example. But there are others in which things are not so straightforward. So probably even to have a positive sign that specific variables are increasing are already enough to measure performance. But again, I mean, it's one thing that occupies our mind to all the members of this initiative, and how to put targets is very much in the agenda of the next year, of the year to come, in which we will be working very hard and put together our brains to try to suggest the best way forward on that. Over.
Thanks, Jose. I mean, we have a very user-oriented perspective here. We we put ourselves in the place of policymakers and even business leaders. You know, how do I know if a food system is transforming? How do I know where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are, and how do I know what to fix? And I'm hoping that the benchmarking process will stimulate others to develop their own benchmarks and just think really hard about what does a level of this indicator really mean. And sometimes it's going to be really hard. There's going to be all sorts of non-linearities in the indicators in terms of benchmarks. So, but I'm hoping this will stimulate a whole set of analyses that will allow these indicators to speak up and sing a little bit more. There's a really good question from Kashif in the Q&A, Kashif Munir. How do we know if the dashboard is adding value? Who'd like to add that? Who'd like to answer that question? Jess or Kate or Katya, any of you would like to, you know, how do we know?
It's a great question. I think, you know, we've spent a lot of time on testimonials coming from researchers, people using it in the classroom, people putting data under the nose of a minister. We've done some analysis with countries, workshopping the dashboard in Senegal and Ethiopia to help them with their decision making. So we've done a lot of different mechanisms to try to get feedback. Katya and Rebecca, do you want to add anything? Just so people know, Katya Pedro and Rebecca McLaren are the two coordinators that make the dashboard run and everything to happen behind it. So here they are. I don't know if either of you want to come in on that.
I can quickly add something. As Jess mentioned, we've collected a lot of feedback from mostly like global level stakeholders, and we're planning an evaluation after the development of the subnational dashboards in the 6 countries to also get feedback on how this is being used in the countries, by whom, how, what kind of decisions are being made based on the dashboard and the data that is available. So I think we've started some work, but there's also more to come.
Thanks. Rebecca, you want to come in?
Yeah, I can just add briefly, like that we're always looking for more feedback. So if anyone on this webinar or others can reach out to us or reach out to us through the dashboard. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback that way, and just always trying to use that to improve the dashboard and make it more usable for all of our users.
Thanks. And we should introduce Kate Schneider, who plays a key coordination management role for the Countdown. Kate, did you want to add anything on this?
Sure, I can add a few thoughts, and good morning, good evening, everyone. From the Countdown perspective, I think we have the benefit of having collaborators sit in such a wide range of institutions and participating in so many of these policy dialogues that, for example, we are able to hear kind of real-time input about how useful having this set of indicators. Right now it's future tense because we're just finalizing them, but hopefully in the future it will be having them is. And so, for example, some of our collaborators have been highly involved in some of the African Union CAADP conversations to incorporate additional food systems indicators. CAADP has been agriculturally focused in the past. And so that's just one example. And I think having collaborators just sit in such a wide range of places, we really benefit. But just like what Rebecca said, we also welcome all kinds of feedback. So please also feel free to reach out.
Thanks, Kate. Two interesting questions. I think one from Sylvia. Sylvia Magezi. Hi, Sylvia. Sylvia's asking, because these data are drawn from multiple data sets, do we ever find instances where they're essentially don't mesh with each other, or they're not interoperable, or they could be confusing when we put them together? Has anyone got any examples of that, and how do we mitigate that? Either in the Countdown or the dashboard.
Probably Kate can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to. Sorry.
Go ahead. Oh no, maybe can I just add the second question, Kate? Maybe you can, or Rebecca or Katya can add. How will the updates be done in the dashboard? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a question.
I can speak to the challenge of data harmonization on the Countdown side. we faced several elements of challenge. I think setting our unit of analysis at country and year helps when we are going to harmonize data. That is how most of these global data sets are available. And so it becomes a technical and practical challenge to match countries across data sets. And we then end up with patterns of missing data because different exercises have data from different countries. And I think, the best we can do at this stage is to document these challenges and any areas where we don't have data or we know that a particular data point was not directly observed and was modeled, but we're incorporating it with a data set where everything else was observed, for that, just to give an example. But it presents quite a big challenge, and we have the benefit of many of our indicators coming from FAO, where everything is so rigorously documented with metadata, and all of these harmonization exercises have already happened, and we rest on their expertise in doing this. But it's hard when we bring in data sets from other data producers if they haven't used the same country naming or they haven't provided the metadata that we would need. Some of this was, the way that we selected indicators through the criterion process, but with the ones we've resulted at, sometimes we still have things that just have to be documented. It's the best we can do.
Yeah, I would think the indicators not meshing is maybe more of an issue for the dashboard than for the countdown, because the countdown process sort of tries to mitigate that or prevent that from happening. But it may happen on the dashboard because there are 250 indicators there. But we rely on users to indicate where there are problems, where they think there are problems, and get back to us. There is a feedback email on the dashboard countdown site, I think. There's a question also from a couple of people about how do the updates work, Rebecca? If a stakeholder wants us to add data to the dashboard, what do they do?
Yeah, so they can reach out to us, either to Kari or myself, or through what you mentioned, the contact email on the dashboard. And we have a set of criteria that we can then provide them with, and they can provide us with some more information. If it's a new indicator, they can provide us with that information for us to be able to review it and decide if we'd like to include it. And if it's an update, just letting us know that there's new data available or something of that nature, just letting us know that. But we are continually working both with our developer to see the best ways to automate data updates, looking at if APIs are possible for that, but also our team is always reviewing data and seeing if new updates are available as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. I mean, we want, please give us suggestions and ideas for data. We're not always going to put them all up because we have different filters around relevance and quality, and they have to be available for a certain number of countries. But we want this to be as useful and broad as possible. So anything on AMR, we're really happy to look at that. Anything on animal welfare. Of course, we want to, Hazel's point about we want to make the data as gender disaggregated and gender relevant as possible. We want more data on women's empowerment. It's not easy to get that good quality data, but we want it if you've got it. I think we're at time, colleagues. I think we've answered most, if not all, of the questions. So I just really want to thank everyone. Have we got time for one more question? Philip, if you can make it very quick, Philip, go ahead.
Can I say?
Very quick, Philip, yeah.
I'm Dr. Muhammad Azim Khan.
Okay.
My question.
Go ahead.
Can you listen to me?
Yes, okay. Go ahead.
I just want to ask from Jessica whether there is thinking going on where we can reduce data, because I can see a lot of duplication in large number of you see these indicators, lot of duplication. So there are data reduction approaches, and Jessica has used because we were together on HLP panel. She used typologies. So if someone is thinking about reducing data, and that can serve holistically our purpose of this dashboard, still it can serve. Yeah.
Thank you. Jess, quickly.
No, I agree with you, and I think the typology analysis is something that's quite interesting, and there's some ongoing work with a colleague, Shauna Downs, who's even drilling down further to look at food environment typologies at the more local level, and that's a whole body of work that she's been undertaking. So I think it does allow for you to do better cross comparisons and really kind of look closely at how food systems are performing through a typology lens. So thank you for that.
Colleagues, we have to call it quits here. I'd like to thank the presenters, Jessica and Ro. I'd like to thank the panelists, Namakolo, Jose, and Mario. And I'd like to thank you for joining us all. On the dashboard and the countdown, please look at it. Please use it. Please critique it. And please act on it. Food system transformation is the biggest single driver of human and planetary health we have available to us. We have to make sure that all the resources in it are guided by action so they have the maximum impact on the things we care about. With that, colleagues, thank you. We will keep doing these update sessions every 6 months or so, just to keep you abreast of what's going on. But we really appreciate your attendance and panelists and everyone associated with the two initiatives. Thank you.